I'm Mary Crafts, and I'm your host today to help all of us learn to craft that meaningful life. It involves so much. In fact, every day when I wake up, I think to myself, today my life is bigger and involves more crafting and awareness than it ever has in my life. This is not a time for me to lay back and say, well, I hope that was a good run because now I'm just relaxing. Just today, I was thinking about my breath and breathing because that is such a big part of my life and changing that. And how that on my next podcast, when I come to Just With You, that's what I'm going to talk about. Aligning ourselves inside and breath being a part of that. And so as our crafting expands, then I look for new guests that I think expand your universe and what you can be about and how that joy can be filling you rather than these things that we see in our lives just weighing us down. I have committed to myself not to turn on the news in the morning. Now, I was an avid doer of that for decades, because ever since 9/11, because I was afraid I was going to miss something that was happening in my world that affected me forever. I stopped. I didn't want to start my day that way. I wanted to start my day with connection to myself, to the higher powers that are here. And that's what I do. To that end, I have invited my dear, dear friend, Kyle Reyes, onto the show with you today, because I want Kyle to share with you how he is reframing his own personal life. And in that reframing, because it always starts here first, in that reframing, he is opening us to a different lens, a different way to see our lives here on this planet. And if we can do that for ourselves, what we know and I talk about all the time, we can do it for humanity. And so, Kyle, welcome. Welcome, my dear friend, to this podcast.
Mary, thank you for allowing me to be here. I mean, again, your reach is so expansive, and so many of us in the community have not only just watched, you influence our community. We've benefited from it, and I personally benefited from it. And so when we connected and this opportunity arose, I was like, yes, let's just
Yes,
have a
yes.
conversation
Heck
between.
yes. So I want to tell my audience a little bit about you, Kyle, and my connection with you and how that we have ended up to be such dear friends. I think you and I both know what this is like because we don't see each other every day,
Yeah,
but when we do, across the room,
yeah.
there's this look, there's this eyebrows up.
Hmm.
Hi, and this is excitement, this energy that we just go to each other and
Yep.
connect because I know that on such deep levels we are connected
Hmm.
soul to soul,
Yep.
same purpose. We walk through life differently, but our purpose is much the same.
I would agree with that, and I would just add that there have been times when we are in the same space, and I will see you, I'll run to you to give you a hug. And even before I get there, I already have imagined in my mind, Mary's about to give me compliments and lift me up. Mary's about to help me feel better about myself. And then sure enough, I get to you, we give each other a hug, and you look into my eyes and you're like, hey, like, and you thank me for what I'm doing, or you give me some sort of kudos and lift me up. So you're exactly right. I appreciate every exchange we have.
Well, I worked on the boards at UVU for well over 15 years. First on the School of Business and then on the foundation board. For those listeners who don't know, UVU is Utah Valley University and the largest university in our state of Utah. Can you believe it? You have grown this, Kyle, to over 47,000 students. Incredible.
Yeah, that's our prediction for this fall. We believe we'll be right around 47,000. Last year we crested 40 about 45,000, which was a
Yeah.
huge feat, especially at a time when nationally, right? Nationally, we have about 4 million less students in higher education than we did in 2018. It's just the value proposition of what colleges offer in the community's eye has gone lower, and so for us to grow in this environment when
Yeah.
people have questions about higher ed is pretty remarkable. But it's been an honor to be a part of the growth of such a great university.
And I believe that leadership obviously has had a lot to do with that.
Mhm.
But the platform underneath that leadership is what I believe has grown UVU. One, you're an open enrollment.
Yes.
So, in my genre of creating oneness in our community and in our world, to open your doors to everyone, if you want to come to school and if you want to learn, we'll find a place for you.
Oh, for sure. And that has been part of our DNA. I mean, we're an institution that's 83 years young. We became a university in 2008. And really, the two presidents that I've had a chance to work with the most, President Matthew Holland, who was our
Yeah.
first president of the new university era, and then President Asford Tuminez, both of them were the right president for that time to really say to the community,
Yeah.
whether you're coming back to school after 20, 30 years, whether you aren't sure if you're, academic enough or college material, we have a place for you and we want to add to whatever you bring to the table in an authentic way. We see you.
Yeah. I have attended the UVU Scholarship Ball, well, now for a couple decades.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the first one that really impacted me, though, other than being the social event of the year in Utah Valley, so was I actually knew the students
Yeah.
who were coming up on stage
Yeah.
that I had contributed to their scholarships. I wanted to leave a lasting legacy at UVU before I left my retirement. And of course, Culinary Crafts did an endowed scholarship with the best place we could, which is in the Culinary Arts program.
Yes. Yes, you did. Thank you.
And I also helped fund a scholarship for another woman. And that day when she rolled her wheelchair over to the stage,
Yeah.
stood up out of her wheelchair, and made her way up the stairs and across the stage to speak, I was like the proud parent.
Yeah.
I was so happy. Just last week, Kyle, I recently connected with Cindy Opal again.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I had not seen her since she graduated.
Oh my goodness.
She is not even using a cane.
Yeah.
She has lost 80 pounds. She is dealing with her MS. It's not even now part of her focus. All
Amazing.
because UVU found her a spot where other universities had turned her away.
Well, and it's UVU and our many friends and advocates like you. I
Yeah.
mean, there's that to when you mentioned the scholarship ball, and that's just one of so many events where we bring together people who have contributed and said, you know what, I think I want to pay it forward. I think I want to use whatever resources I have to provide empowerment opportunities for the next generation. And I'm not even talking about the next like generation in terms of age. Sometimes it's somebody returning back to school and they want to go to school with their child.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing to see. And I love that you had that connection with Cindy because that
Yeah.
is one of the most memorable experiences that we've all had at UVU.
Yeah. And I remember being on the board, the foundation board, and we have been through, well, three vice presidents of institutional development since I was on that board. And we were going to get ready to go through another one. And I just thought, something has to be different this time. I don't know what that is, but something has to be different because the university is on the precipice of being launched by rocket power. Astrid
Yeah.
Dominguez, okay, the new president. I'm like,
Right.
who will they pick? Who will they pick? And the moment in that board when they said your name, I just felt like the tears coming up inside of me, and because I was already so close to you,
Yeah.
but I knew you, and you had done like what this institution stood for. Started in the bottom of the ranks, and
Yeah.
then worked your way up, proved who you were, what you can do, and people were seeing the results. They couldn't deny them to the point that when it came time to look for a new vice president, well, you were the only candidate standing tall. The rest of them just washed away. It
Well,
was
that's
you.
kind of you. That's kind of you, Mary. Honestly, I will say, just like you've talked about before in other settings, I think all of us face this imposter, mentality sometimes, or some variation of that, right, where we doubt
Yeah.
ourselves. And I know in the space of women empowerment that you've been such a vital, proponent of promoting opportunities. Um, I have when President Jimenez came to me and made that offer and said, "Look, I think I want you to move over from student affairs, where that's where your passion is." She knew where my passion was,
Right.
is the students. She said, "But I need you in some other space here to go help tell our story to the masses." I thought to myself, I'm not sure I'm the right person for that, but I know that I can go and tell the story passionately of what we're doing at UVU.
Yeah.
And so through the grace and trust of other people, mentors, and some miracles, I think we've had a good time, and I think we're building. Our best days are yet ahead. Even it's so exciting.
And that first time I saw at a public event, you in your new role and your wife by your side. So let's
Yeah.
talk about Michelle for a minute.
Oh, let's talk about Michelle.
Michelle is a native Navajo.
Yeah.
She was in a severe car accident
Mm.
that almost took her life, but it did take her arm when she was young.
Yeah.
And of course, I didn't even know that she didn't have one arm. She's so gracious about it.
Yeah.
How many times have I hugged Michelle?
I know.
Hundreds? And I didn't know. What is that about? But to see her all of a sudden in her quiet graciousness step up to stand beside you and to suddenly allow her light to shine and to be standing there with you as an equal in her own way was so powerful.
Yeah.
And you, with your cultural background, you're more than just Hawaiian. You're also Filipino. Tell me all the different
Yeah.
things that are inside of you. Yeah, it's some craziness.
So my mom is Hawaiian Japanese from the Big Island of Hawaii, and my father immigrated from the Philippines, from Zambales. So he's Filipino, my mom Hawaiian Japanese, and Michelle Navajo. So our kids are Hawaiian, Filipino, Japanese, and Navajo.
And beautiful, may I say? Oh God, your children should all be on the front of magazines as the most
Well,
beautiful children in the world. Seriously.
you've seen Michelle, so you know that's why.
Yeah, she is beautiful. There's no question. Oh my gosh, she
Yeah.
just I don't know if I could say anyone that I know that's more gracious and more beautiful, and she has the heart to go with it,
Yeah.
which is what's really profound.
No, it's true.
So I've watched you this whole time, just learn to admire you and love you, and now you've written a book
Yes.
of which just excited me to no end, Kyle. And the name of your new book is Lens of Humanity.
Yeah.
When you told me the name of the book, I just felt this wave of understanding. So I'm going to read, and then you're going to talk.
Yeah.
I'm going to read what you sent to me as the framework around which this book exists.
Go for it.
Reframing our impact on humanity. Are you finding it difficult to positively engage with people who view the world differently from you? Now, every single person who reads that question is going to answer,
Yes.
My world has changed. The world that I grew up in the 50s,
Yeah.
it's changed.
Yeah.
I never knew in my town who were Democrats and who were Republicans.
Yeah.
I never knew who were actually even liberal and who were conservative. I didn't. I just grew up and everyone were good. They were all good people.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up the most significant political election in my lifetime was President Kennedy and President Nixon. And there was a lot of connection between a Republican and a Democrat. They were saying things like, well, Kennedy is Catholic. And now you think like, well, what does that have to do with anything? But back then, that was a big deal. He was going to be the first Catholic.
Right.
But the nation as a whole looked past that he was maybe Catholic and looked to a man who could lead us. And if President Kennedy was known as anything, he was known as a great uniter.
Mm-hmm.
His lens was humanity was huge.
Right.
And the fact that you've written a book on that, and then you went on, do you feel the heaviness of our societal and political divides? Uh-huh. Have you seen evidence of the erosion of humanity? Kyle, the topics that you're addressing in your book are the most profound and important things that we will address in our lifetime.
Thank you.
I have 30 more years on this planet, at least.
Yep.
And I dedicate my life to this. I want this to shift in my lifetime. And you are part of that.
Yeah,
So
thank
share
you.
with my listeners where the idea for this book came from,
Okay.
the life lessons you learned to be able to write it, and your hope for what happens.
Thank you, Mary. And I'll say, let's exchange. I won't just kind of go for quite a few minutes here. I do want to answer your questions, but please interject any thoughts as I go through.
Oh, honey, I don't have a problem with interjection. You know that.
Well, it's a conversation between friends, right? And
Yeah.
I will say this, Mary, doing so my background coming from a mixed racial home, a mixed religious home, my father Catholic, my mother LDS or Mormon, Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, a mixed linguistic home. My brother, my sister, and I'm the youngest of three growing up in Southern California. We were nested in a rich sort of diversity of heritages and languages and worldviews. And quite literally, I mean, I attended a junior high that was predominantly Jewish. Our neighbors were from Iran, right next door. Our next door neighbors were from Iran. The majority of my high school self-identified as Hispanic or Latino. And so in terms of exposure, my brother, my sister, and I felt like there was always this navigation of who we were and where our people were, right? Culturally and otherwise. Mm-hmm. As I continued in my career, and I started my career at Utah Valley, what was then State College back in 2003, and my first job to be encouraging young people who were first in their families to go to college. I remember sitting with a number of students and thinking to myself, the students, especially young graffiti artists, they were like, you know what? I don't know if anybody is even seeing me. I don't know if anybody's seeing my complexity of what I bring to the table. And I started to try to really listen and pay attention to what they were saying. Since then, I've tried to spend my career at UVU focusing on this idea of empowering young people to become their authors of their own stories, right? Through education, through validation of their art and all the other forms of communication. In that effort, I realized that my desire to have them be seen and heard was not unique to any one race, any one religion, any gender identity. It was a human desire. Humans yearn to be seen and heard. Humans yearn to connect with one another at every age. Now, when we're younger, we may not be able to articulate it. My 7-year-old daughter, when she was even 2 or 3, she wasn't saying, "Dad, Mom, I yearn to connect." She just wanted a hug. And that hug was a connection. There's these messages we send to each other about what it means for us to belong to something. Well, in my work at UVU, I have been observing and I've been researching intercultural communication and intercultural understanding. So in my work when I was chief of staff to President Holland, or when I was UVU's first chief inclusion officer, or student affairs vice president, so much of what I focused on was how do we understand one another? Not necessarily agree. We don't have to have consensus. Not everybody has to believe the same thing, but how do we understand one another so that we don't demonize one another, right? And my doctoral research, as well as things that I was working on with President Holland, as well as things that I was working on with President Tuminez. President Tuminez, when we first met, she said, "Hey, I hear you're writing a book." And I was like, "Well, kind of, not really." She's like, "Well, I want you to finish that. I want you to write it. I want you to take that seriously." So for the past 5 years, I have been working on this idea of reframing, what can be very polarizing, which again, it's a passion of mine, but diversity, equity, and inclusion work, depending on where you stand with that, can be very polarizing, right? And
Yeah.
so every time I've tried to
I
reframe
think
and
that our state is the prime example of that.
oh yeah, yeah,
I mean,
uh,
here we were expanding diversity, equity, inclusion in our workplace, in our universities, in all the
mhm,
state things, and suddenly the state legislature passed a bill that said, "I'm sorry, who gave you permission to do that? We have to disband all of that." What?
exactly, exactly. No, and it's a bit mind-boggling, because here's what I wanted to do with this book. I wanted to not have it become a book where we start to judge one another and say, well, so and so needs this book because they suck at humanity, or so and so's
Oh,
racist, so they need to read this book, or
yeah,
this entire demographic is not woke enough, so therefore they need this book. And I'm like, that's not my style, number
yeah,
one.
yeah,
Number
yeah.
two, it doesn't actually address the core of why this work is so important. The reason why human connection work is so important is because at the end of the day, everything that we're facing, we don't live our lives in vacuums. When we work for an organization, or we have our own business, or we live in a community, every day we have a chance to either be a positive or a negative influence on other humans every single day. And so part of this then is to say, can I invite my friends, my family, others, and myself on a daily basis to consider development of four different lenses throughout their lives? Now, nobody ever arrives to the oh, I've mastered this lens. This is a lifelong
It's
journey,
ongoing.
ongoing. And so very quickly, the four lenses that I invite readers to consider is the inner lens is looking inward first. It all starts, you mentioned this at the beginning, it all starts with
Yeah,
us interrogating what we bring to the
yeah.
table. And if we're not willing to be a bit, and lean into with cultural humility that we've got some things to learn, then we're already going to be the worse for it. We need to approach life to say, I need to unpack and own what I bring to the table, including my biases and prejudices, right? Things that might have been there that I didn't even know were there. That's the inner lens. The second lens is the context lens. How do we expose ourselves
Ah,
to more stories and more understanding of history, and more understandings of different takes and perspectives, so that we have a more full picture, right, of every situation that we're in? If Mary Crafts and I have an exchange, we have a debate, let's just say, right? We have a debate about a topic. But then all of a sudden, Mary says, "Can I give you some more context about where I'm coming from?" And I'm authentically listening to understand. Then all of a sudden, I reframe. I have a new lens on how I
yes.
interact with Mary about that same topic. Now, we can still walk away disagreeing at some level and still have love for one another. But we could disagree, but I at least understand and appreciate your perspective because you've given me more context. And I've actually believed that I can learn something from you, right? And so this context lens is so important. This means let's listen to more podcasts, let's read more books, let's learn new languages. Let us expose ourselves to the difference in the world so that we can appreciate it, not necessarily so we agree with everybody, but that we can at least see where they're coming from. Those two lenses. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to talk about that second lens, the
Go for it. Let's do
context
it.
lens. That piece, I think, has so much value, but the way that it's communicated, the communication skill
Hmm.
is so important. So
It is. It is.
some people love to share with you context. And it goes like this. Well, let me tell you. That's how it
Exactly.
starts every time. Or
Exactly.
like, well, and they get the finger up. And you know immediately whatever's coming after that, I'm not interested, I can tell you
Right.
that. Or
Right.
there's that way of looking at people with the while you're talking, there's the
Yep.
you know,
Yep.
and they're just waiting to tell
Yep.
you what their context looks like. That has to first, that's why step one is so important.
Mhm. Mhm.
That you have to be at peace with what you believe.
Yeah.
And that peace, it's so tied together with love. If you are not loving you, then it's very difficult to love someone else and their viewpoint and value them as an individual. You can only do number two if the person you're talking to you has value to you
Yeah.
as a
Yeah.
human being.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
when we lose that critical piece, sharing context becomes very difficult. And I'm not free from that. I'm I'll be like, well, that's not how I think it goes, And I
No.
can be fairly forceful in my putting forth things, but well, let me share with you those kind of words and tell me more about and
Ah.
how does that affect you? And those kind of phrases have become so much a part of me now. I used to just sit and wait for my turn to talk. I didn't care about what you were saying. I wanted my turn to talk.
And you're
But
and you're
now,
formulating the arguments. Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
But now, if we can truly hear what the words
Yeah.
of someone else are, then we can share non-defensively our thought
Yeah.
processes. That kind of context, Kyle, if you're teaching that in your book,
Yeah.
it's a New
Yeah.
York Times bestseller before it's ever hit.
Well, so you're actually leading me into the third lens beautifully because I would say that the first two lenses, my invitation, remember, this is not for us to point fingers and for me to say, gosh, Mary could use more context lens development, right? This is for us to look at ourselves with all four lenses to say, what do I need to do to go get greater context of civil rights history? So when something happens, I don't just react by some bumper sticker, platform that somebody told me. That I actually have formed my own opinions because I've actually studied and I actually know more context about the issue. But the first two lenses, I'll say this, is the work that we're supposed to do internally. It's looking inward, reflecting on why do I believe that so strongly? Oh, okay. And understanding our worldview, that inner lens, that second lens of context is making sure that we get exposure to the different perspectives. But you touched upon something which is so nice that it's a natural bridge to the third lens. The third lens being the empathy lens. This is where we start to engage outward. And our engagement outward is at an individual level, empathy, and then the fourth lens being the community lens. How do we build and lift communities? So let me go in order there. The
Okay.
first, the third lens then, empathy lens, is exactly what you were talking about. That this is the belief that when we come into exchange with other humans, if we fundamentally disagree with something that they've said, let us pause and let's reframe what this engagement is all about. We have to do some analyses. Number one, do I care about this relationship, right? If somebody's just yelling at me on the street, I'm probably not going to engage, okay?
Yeah.
Because I don't
Yeah.
have a relationship. If somebody throws a social media bomb on my platform, I'm like, okay, it's not, I'm going to probably
Yeah.
ignore it. I'm not going to give them the time of day if they haven't established a relationship, right? So we assess the depth and level of care on that. Second, we assess, is this a discussion or is this a debate? Because if it's a debate, all of a sudden we feel like somebody has to lose. And
Yeah.
once we're in that framework, humanity goes out the window. And here's why. Because when we feel like in a debate, one of us has to lose, then we are already positioning one human above another human. If we are in an exchange where there's a discussion and I say, you know what, I'd like to get my points across, and Mary, I'm also going to lean in and say, but I'd like to authentically know what you have a take on this. And then Mary gives me exchange, and I'm like, oh, I'm not sure how that sits with me. Can you tell me more? And so these questions of genuine inquiry, approaching this with cultural humility, having courageous empathy for somebody who disagrees with you. It's so easy to have empathy for somebody who looks at the world the same way you do. But when somebody disagrees with you fundamentally, the courageous empathy needs to show up and you say, you know what? I'm going to, for a moment, try to see where their passion for this issue is coming from. And you're exactly right. Empathy focuses so much, the empathy lens focuses so much on how we engage with one-on-one with other humans, especially with people who look at the world differently than us.
So, just before the podcast started, I shared with you that I had been to North Carolina.
Yeah.
And the Confederate flag, when I see that flying, it took my breath away. I didn't understand it. I'm like, oh my gosh, why would they fly that flag? That is like so offensive to so many different people. I don't understand. And I actually felt afraid.
Mm.
So as we drove along and as we were driving back to Charlotte Airport, I began to think about them as people. And what does that represent to them? And why do they feel that way? And I
Yeah.
began to think about the generations before them, way back, who are teaching their children that the government came in and took away something from us. And that has never left some of the people in the South. The government took something from them,
Sure.
and they don't have the right. And it's bred something in them. And if I had been raised that way, I might feel the same. In fact,
Right.
I probably would. If I had been raised in the home that they were raised in and that their parents were raised in and their parents, and that they were not going to ever give up what they believed was taken for them. That could apply to my context. What if someone came into my home and said, Mary, from now on, we've banned all of the kind of stuff that you post on social media. Mm-hmm. You can show pictures of your family and your dogs. You can show pictures of you dancing. You can show pictures of your travel. But don't ever post again about love of self and empathy. You might not do that. We're not allowed to do that. It's changed now. I would probably still be flying my flag of oneness outside for generations to come. Does that make sense?
Oh, it totally does. It totally does. And let me nuance, because I love what you just shared here. Let me nuance something in terms of what I am inviting all of us to consider, right? There are definitely things that we need to advocate for. Like when we see injustices and we see inequities and the institution of slavery and those things, I mean, I think historically and from a humanity-driven lens, we need to speak up and speak out when we feel like humans are being unjustly treated and dehumanized, right, whatever that might be. But I like what you're saying there in terms of reframing for us that we can have an understanding of people that we consider to be vastly, vastly different, even for a moment, even for example, even if I say, you know what, at the end of the day, you're probably not going to change my mind that slavery was bad. Right, evil institution, a bad thing. But can I have empathy for some of the pieces that you articulated there? Yes. Can I at least see why and how you view the world the way you do? Yes. Now that said, can we also have a healthy exchange where I can then share to you why I'm so passionate about, right, this particular way of life and dehumanizing individuals in that way? And so even the empathy lens, the invitation there is not to say, oh, you kind of just have to accept everybody's ideas or everybody's belief.
Yeah.
No,
it's not about that. Yeah.
It's not about that. It's, do we actually try to humanize them instead of putting them in a category that said they voted for X, therefore they're evil, or they believe this, therefore they're, how about we engage with difference in a way that is healthy? So part of this is checking, sometimes people say in the world of diversity, you got to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And I'm like, well, as humans, we don't love to be uncomfortable, but if we can look at engagement with difference as healthy for us. Now, there are some situations that are not healthy, right? Abusive situations, people are yelling at you. Those, you can check out of those and say, I'm not going to engage with you because you're not willing to see me as a human as we have this exchange. But where there's a chance for discussion and for you to help that energy of that conversation say, you know what, I sincerely want to understand, but I also want to share my thoughts. Can we humanize each other's experience right here by authentically listening and lean into that dissonance, right? Sometimes we have a dissonant moment in our lives. The melody of our life is going along and all of a sudden, boom, there's a dissonant chord there. And our reaction might be like, oh, discomfort, let me escape from this. I don't want to engage with a thought or idea that might be different than my own. if it can be done in a healthy way, that's where growth takes place, is our conversation with some of that difference and that
Yeah.
dissonance, and eventually seeking resolution.
So, as you know, I also work, one of the things I work with is the prevention of childhood sexual abuse.
Yeah.
And I have really delved into that so much.
Yes.
And I listen to so many people and so many talks and so many conferences where they talk about the perpetrator. And I would give anything, and I have made my voice heard. Please, can we stop referring to the perpetrator as a perpetrator? Can we refer to them as also a victim? When we begin to see the perpetrator as also a victim of his upbringing, of his training, of his lens, then we can empathetically help him as well. The training and the things that we are instituting to help victims, we need to then offer to the perpetrator, where can you be healed? I truly believe that so many of these people who are perpetrators would give anything if someone could offer them help. I don't, people aren't raised and then think all of a sudden, I think I'm going to grow up to be a child sexual abuser. And I think I'm going to rape children. I think that's my goal in life. That's not how it works.
No.
They go through such trauma themselves. And so it's the healing of all and seeing all as valuable.
You use a word there that the total title of the book, Lenses of Humanity, and then the subtitle is How Reflection, Connection, and Empathy Can Heal Our World. I thought about that subtitle for quite a while. In fact, my sister and Michelle, they influenced kind of the reimagining of that subtitle. The reason why we included can heal our world, it doesn't say that reflection, connection, and empathy will heal our world. It leaves it up to the reader to say, what's possible? Am I going to take the ownership to go and try to be a part of the healing of the world? And each one of us has a responsibility in that, right? And what's interesting that, to bridge what you just said of healing, I think it's interesting. The fourth lens of community, the community lens, essentially says, let us never forget that we are nested in all these microcosms of communities. Each one of us belongs to certain groups that we would feel are a part of our larger community of support and love and those things. And we don't agree with everybody in those communities, right? Yeah. And that's okay. But the intentionality for me of the community lens is this. I drew upon my Pacific Islander heritage for this framework, for this particular lens. And I talk about it in the concept of three canoes. And so go with me on this for the
I love
describing this for the metaphor.
Yeah.
I imagine our sense of responsibility of community building as three separate canoes, and that we are always sitting in the middle canoe. And here's why. Somebody in our life, when we're rowing along in this canoe, right? And all of my heritages are canoe people, Hawaiian, Japanese, Filipino. They were all part of island people. So they all had to go venture forth and build bridges by going out in the canoe somewhere, right? I argue that we're always sitting in the middle canoe because no matter where we go, no matter where we row, somebody always came before us and somebody will always be coming after us. Always. And so what I invite readers to consider is the way I would like to frame community building is multi-directional. How do I build community with those who came before? Well, there's a number of ways that I can show gratitude, commemorate and celebrate, study their history, study their impact. By me doing that with those who have come before, I believe I'm lifting humanity in a community with a community that helped me get to where I'm at. That's parents and grandparents and aunties and uncles, but then also Matt Holland and Astrid Tuminez and Mary Crafts and those who have helped Kyle Reyes get to where I'm at. The middle canoe then is your community that you're currently a part of, all the things that you're engaged in right now. And then the last community is just a sense of what you've already done. And that's turn your attention to that next generation of impact, of donating to a scholarship, of mentoring young people. Because I know how many people you mentor. Actually, I probably don't know, but I know that you're active in mentoring formally and informally hundreds of people because I know people that go to you. That ability to say, I'm lifting community with those who came before, with those who are around me, and with those who will follow is something that we can be very intentional about. And I think when we're in the framework of community building, it is hard to look at somebody and say, oh, they're not worth investing in. Like, I think to myself, every student that walks the halls of UVU is worth investing in, is worth my time, is worth getting to know. Now, logistically, realistically, I might not be able to sit for a half an hour with 45,000 students and hear their stories. But there are ways I can definitely communicate that I'm here for them, that I showed up for them. And you and I both know showing up is such a critical part of our influence in
It's
this.
99% of being who you are. Is
Yes.
what you show up for and who you show up for.
Yes.
And showing up for yourself first. And what I choose to do every single day, I put my feet on the ground.
Yeah.
And then showing up for others.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's if you just show up, people who feel like life is passing them by, or people who feel like, I don't know how many times do people say, how did you get so involved, Mary? I just showed up. That
Yeah.
was it. That was it. And
Yeah.
pretty soon somebody said, do you want to do something other than just come and take up a seat? Yes, yes. What is it? How do I do it? What do I do?
Yeah.
And that's it. That's how you become engaged. You show up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll end where your passions lie, and that is the very last chapter. So it's 13 chapters, 3 chapters per lens, and then the closing chapter is kind of just a bringing it all together chapter. But I argue that in order for us to try to develop these 4 lenses of humanity, we have to be patient with ourselves, and we have to show humanity to ourselves in our complexity and in the messiness that is our lives. There is nobody that's perfect in this work. There are things that we can learn from each person day to day. There are times we have to show ourselves grace. So do I still, I wrote a book on humanity. Do I still get worked up about something? Yes. Oh my gosh. Do I still have judgments and strong feelings? And do I catch myself in a bias? Yes. That's the human condition. My whole invitation, though, is intentionality. Are we trying to be more intentional about how we show up in this world? And can we develop greater lenses of humanity for each other so that we can show up better for one another? And I think we can. We're not born with this, meaning we're born with some of it, right? Human connection, the desire, all that stuff. But in terms of the skills to really help other humans feel seen, heard, validated, dignified in their existence. When we get political about a population, refugees or undocumented individual, whatever it might be, we get political, and I get it. But when I talk about them in the frame of my students, I'm like, I just want them to know that they're my students, and I'm going to champion them, and I'm going to advocate for them, no matter what background they bring, no matter what sexual orientation, gender identity, worldview, religion, all that stuff. I am going to advocate for them. And in order for me to authentically advocate for them, I need to do my own work of greater exposure to diversity, greater exposure to understanding how they might view the world, so that I know what it means for me to show up for them. So anyway, just wanted to end there.
Wow, Kyle. May I ask a favor?
Please, of course.
When your book is actually published, right now at the end of this podcast, we're going to include all your social media links so people can get to know you, follow you, see all the things that you do and involved with. They'll see when your launch is happening.
Yep.
I'm sure you'll have your links to buy this book on social media, which I will be buying. I absolutely am just enthralled with you. But this work, what you're talking about, is my go-to. It's what my life is about. But when you publish,
Yeah.
would you come back?
Yes, of course. Of course. Anything Mary asks me to do, anything you ask me to do, the answer is yes.
I want you to come back. I want you to come back and share, what has happened? How's the impact? What are you hoping? That we can actually provide the link at that time for people to actually buy the book. And you and I have a deeper discussion yet to do. And that is on this bigger concept of oneness.
Yeah.
And the way that it starts is right here.
Mm-hmm.
Recognizing when I am not true to that thing which I say is the most important to me, when I'm out of alignment.
Yeah.
And it might be at the grocery store when I see someone in an outfit that I just like, what the heck? And you roll your eyes and you kind of like, well, did they look in the mirror before they left the house? That kind of a thing. And then I'm like, just that little thing. I'm like, that was the thing right there, that moment when I put a wall between the two of us, that I was different, that I was better, that she should know better, that I was shitting all over her, that she should have done this and she should have been this. But now I've been doing this so long, Kyle,
Mm-hmm.
it takes me about 3 seconds to shift and go, I see you. I see you. And the next time you go around the aisle at the grocery store and you come out the other end, I'll be there with a smile.
Yeah.
I see you.
Well, and you just illustrated beautifully that it takes practice. It takes Mary being intentional about checking yourself and being humble enough to say, you know what? I'm not a bad person if I check myself and I actually do something about it and I change and I shift. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes
Absolutely.
to call yourself on it. And so, the Kyle of 20 years ago, I think I'm better now. I mean, again, I'm still improving every day, but I do think I'm more sensitive to the words I use. I'm sensitive to how people, just my tone and approach. But the Kyle of 20 years ago, the judgments I was making, some of this, eventually did I come around and see some of the error of my judgment? Yes, but I wasn't in the form of practice. Now, living this and trying to walk the talk, not just write a book and then everybody that knows me is like, wow, that is a disconnect, right? I want people that know me, because I share so many personal stories in this book. I want people that when they read it, they actually are like, oh, I actually believe that he's living that. Like, I actually think that he's authentic with that because I've seen it in action, right? And so it was so important for me to share that it's part memoir, it's part public sort of discourse, and it's part of my research and academics. But more importantly, one of my publishers, one of the early publisher prospects said, Kyle, who's your audience? And you know this, having written a book, right? People ask you, who's your audience? And
Yeah.
At first you're like, well, I don't want it to be limited. But then they say, well, we kind of need to know where to put your book on the shelf at Barnes and Noble or how to position it in Amazon.
Yeah.
Well, after a few days, I came back to them and I said, actually, my book is for my kids. And then they said, what? And I said, well, here's the thing. I know it's important. I mean, I want to get it out there. But frankly, I kind of don't care how much it sells. I mean, like at my core, I would love for it to be successful, but I don't hinge my I don't hang my hat of success on whether or not this book, becomes a bestseller.
Right.
For if my kids and my grandkids can read it over their lifetimes at some point and know what I stood for and know that this is what I tried to promote throughout my life, that's my cup filler, right? And so once it became about that, then all of these other like filters on my shoulder, oh, Kyle, it's not academic enough, or why are you sharing so many personal stories, or it doesn't have as much data that it needs, or why are you, like, all of those editors came off my shoulders, and I was able to just write it almost as sort of a last lecture to my kids to say, hey, I don't care what you major in. I don't care how much money you make. I don't care the size of your family. I don't care what you gravitate towards in your life. Other than, I want you to be kind humans, and I think there's a way to do that and be more intentional about it. So
we have the same goal.
Oh.
That others know that we love them.
Yeah.
And that things matter. And they matter to us. All right, Kyle, you're going to come back. You promised. I heard it.
Will
It's
do.
recorded. All right. To all of our listeners who stayed with us to the end, I want you to know that this is one of the most profound podcasts that I will do this year, probably. And this direction of oneness in our community, of feeling a connection to those around us, to our world. The most important connection that you will have or have. Most people would say, well, with my children or with my spouse, but the most important connection that you will ever have is with yourself. And that's why Kyle framed this in his first lens. And so let's focus on ourselves to begin with, of how we love and interact with the world, how we interact with ourselves, the messages that we're sending on a daily basis. And when we feel like we are in a solid place, you don't have to wait till you're all the way there. That's never happening. But there will something inside of you come up, and you'll feel it. When you start being whole, you'll suddenly realize your lens is shifting, and you see the community. You see others. You see your husband, your spouse differently. You see your children differently. They're not just your children to corral and make sure that they graduate. They are your humans that you connect with and that you cherish. It's all part of crafting a meaningful life. Be with me next time as we take another step into what makes us us. Thank you.
Crafting a Meaningful Life.